my loyal listeners. It's Mimi bringing you some hard facts today. And that is that most people these days either have a family member or a friend or themselves that struggle with addiction, unless they live in denial world. I myself have been in recovery for 33 years, and I have also witnessed the tragedy of friends and family members that have died from addiction, some alcohol, some other drugs. And I have a lot in common, I know already, with my guest today, Judge Mary Beth O'Connor. And she wrote a book called Junkie to Judge, which I love the title. So, hi, say hello to everybody.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. And I will say, I do appreciate you mentioning that you too are friends and family, because when I talk to friends and family, I always emphasize that everyone I know in recovery, we are friends and family too, right? And so we understand their struggles, we understand the fear, we understand the frustration. And that I think it helps us connect better with the friends and family when they understand that we are part of their group as well.
As well. And before we started, I did the polite thing and said, do I call you Your Honor or Mary Beth? And she said, Mary Beth. So I'm so glad you're here. And I want to talk about your journey first and what it was like for you. Let's do that. Let you start.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I say, unfortunately, my start was not as uncommon as I wish it were, which is basically that child abuse led to childhood addiction, right? And so
Mhm.
I grew up in an environment where I didn't have any parent really focused on me or supportive of me, but also there was a lot of violence, physical violence, verbal, emotional, and some sexual violence. And so that was just a very high stress environment. I mean, I never knew what was going to happen to me. And what I did and the consequences of it were like there was no connection between my behavior and what was going to happen. And that's not a good way for children to be raised. You know, you don't learn sort of cause and effect.
Right.
But it just really primed me to be attracted to drugs. And so my first drug was when I was 12, and it was alcohol, and it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill Wine, which a lot of people
Never
know.
goes far. Okay.
Yes,
I can
yes.
relate. Yeah.
Yes, that sweet wine start, right? In fact, my girlfriend and I drank it. We were so young. We drank it out of Flintstones glasses that used to have grape jelly in them. Like that was our level of
That's
sophistication.
hysterical. And I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic, and I guess they would call him a binge drinker. Because he held a full-time job, and he took care of us at night because my mother worked during the day, and I was the oldest of four, and pretty much I ended up raising my siblings because it wasn't a two-parent household. You know, there were one was day shift, one was night shift. And I was in between since I was like five or six in charge for like that hour. And of course, I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I hated alcohol. I think my first drink, I was 20, and I only did it because it was a social, acceptable, and expected thing, right? So, so you had your first drink at 12, and then what happened?
I mean, what I noticed was how much better it made me feel, right? And so that really caught my attention. Like, this is a real positive experience. I like need more of this. And so I pursued alcohol right away. I mean, I was making opportunities to drink, looking for them. I even stole beer from my dangerous stepfather because that's how much I wanted the alcohol. So I was already willing to take risks in order to get it. But I also quickly added in weed. There were a lot of pills around when I was a teenager. This is in the mid to late 70s. I did a lot of acid my sophomore year of high school. And then when I was 16, I found what became my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I was shooting up within 6 months. I was
Oh
in full
my.
bore addiction when I graduated from high school. So it was a really fast and even
Yes.
even among the other drug users, it was an extreme escalation.
And you're younger than I am because I hear the decades you're talking about. So, um, my drinking didn't start until late 70s. And my drug of choice was pot. I really loved pot. It just calmed me right down. I loved it. The drinking became an addiction. Um, and so I understand that. And I only started drinking because of the husband that I married was an alcoholic.
Oh,
And we'd go to bars, of course, and I'd get a 7 and 7 because, like you said, it was sweet. But I would nurse it all night and he'd make fun of me, you know. So mine was like more gradual than yours, but doesn't matter because you still get to the same place, right?
that's right. I mean, there's all different kinds of patterns. And like you say, you can have a problem and not even use or drink every day. I mean, there's all different ways for it to show up. Today, as I'm sure you know, the definition of addiction, which today we call substance use disorder, that's, the medical term for addiction. Today, the definition is continuing to use despite negative consequences. And that can look like a wide variety of things. There's a wide variety of ways for consequences to show up. There's a lot of wide variety of patterns of drug use that can lead to that.
Yes.
And there's also a variety of severity, right? Like today we talk about it's on a spectrum, like all mental health conditions, mild, moderate, severe. And so there is a different way of thinking than when I first got sober, but it fits in with the wide variety of experiences and patterns and
Yeah.
impact of the people that I know.
Ironically, which life is very ironic, I ended up being in the bar business. I actually owned 2 bars with different husbands. One was a failure because he drank all the profits, and the other one was a success. However, um, I added, because of an accident, pain medication
Oh,
and did not believe that do not take good alcohol applied to me because by that point I could put away quite a bit and not show any signs, not slur, not anything. So it's just interesting to go from never wanting to, and then all of a sudden, here I am, and I'm in the bar business, so everybody's drinking, and most of those people are dead. This is from um, 20 years ago when I finally left Scranton, and they kept drinking and doing other things. You know, it's sad. But so you experienced some trauma in your childhood. And it sounds, was it the stepfather?
yeah, well, my mother was violent, but my stepfather was much more violent, and he was very violent with her. And I think we underappreciate the trauma of witnessing one parent beating another parent. Like that in,
Yes.
in and of itself is traumatic, even if it's never turned on you. But it
Um,
was turned on me. He was physically violent with me. He was sexually violent with me. But then also I had several sexual assaults in my teens and early 20s, and I moved in with a violent boyfriend for a while. So it was really a lot of different
wow.
violence, throughout my life up until my mid 20s.
And when you were at home and you were a minor, you didn't tell anybody.
No, I didn't tell anybody. I mean, there's a silent message not to tell, but there is also a verbal. The other thing was part of the reason not to tell was because the police came several times when he beat my mother, and
Mhm.
they only arrested him once when he really almost killed her. And even then he was only gone for like a couple days. And so I didn't see and the neighbors would hear, and they only called the police, I think 3 or 4 times, even though
Yeah,
they heard many,
yeah,
many more times than that. So I wasn't getting the message that if you say something, something is going to happen to remedy the
right.
situation. That wasn't the message that I was receiving.
No. And as a child, of course, my situation was I was home in the 50s and 60s, and I was young, and it was whatever happens in the house stays in the house. And then when I was an adult and I got into these alcoholic abusive marriages too, with the second one, it was 79 and then into the 80s. They were not treating domestic violence seriously still. And women were actually getting killed in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And, I had a really tough situation because I had 2 little kids, no child support, and I was putting myself through college. And then I'd come home to have this big hulking man that couldn't accept that we were divorced, pushing me around. So of course I wanted to go in and have some wine and weed just to relax from the trauma of what was going on. So I just want to say this one thing too. It just popped into my head before our interview. You know, years ago, you see the old movies, everybody smoked. Everybody smoked cigarettes. There was ads all the time for cigarettes. Everybody knew it could kill you. Some people didn't believe it, but it took so many decades before anything was done. And now, you know, you can't smoke in public places and you don't see ads for cigarettes. And I bring that up because I feel the same way about alcohol. And, you know, let's face it, they romanticize it.
Mhm.
They romanticize it. And that's all these young kids that they're getting these messages already, you know?
Well, and the other thing was there were a lot of studies that, upon further review, were inaccurate that were saying things like a little bit of drinking is good for you, right? And
Yes.
it turned out that those studies aren't true, and that even moderate use of alcohol can have serious negative health impacts. And moderate use is 1 drink a day for women and 2 drinks a day for men, and that's like the right size drink, right? Not like the wine glass filled to the top.
I was way over
But
that.
I mean, it increases cancer risk, like breast cancer risk in particular, significant liver disease, heart disease. I mean, there's a lot of negative impacts from moderate drinking, and people are getting more and more aware of that. And
Yeah.
people are, and there's like that current movement toward mindful drinking, right? And it's not saying never drink, it's saying be mindful about how often, in what circumstances. So more people, let's say 30 and under, or fewer are drinking now, although some of them are replacing that with cannabis, but fewer are drinking. And it is more common for
Yeah.
people to want, let's say, like at a party or a work event, they want actually
Yeah.
a fun mocktail or some non-alcoholic drink, and not just have a choice of water or
Yeah.
Coke, So,
I'm actually for cannabis because
yeah, yeah.
I I hung out with musicians a lot in the 70s, and that was their drug of choice. I mean, they did drink, but they liked their weed. And I think that is like the least harmful of all these things in moderation also, right? In
Yeah,
moderation.
yes. I mean, I'd say a couple things. One is that on the data we have now, if you're going to pick one drug to use, it should be edible cannabis, because
Yes.
that's the least harmful. Now, on the other hand, there are true risks for cannabis consumption, and we need to share the actual risk, not the pretend risk, not the made up risk, but for all of the drugs, the actual risks. And the other thing is that most people use all drugs in moderation, and that includes meth. I mean, most people use in moderation, and so we need to be realistic about that. So I think it's important, like with the young people, that we tell the truth about what the risks are, but
Yeah.
also that we talk harm reduction, right? And moderation is a type of harm reduction, and waiting until you're a little older to start is actually a harm reduction, because the older you are when you
Yes.
start using, the less likely you are to develop an addiction.
Exactly. I used for 20 years. I say 20 years because I didn't start till I was 20. And what happened was when I had the accident and I said to my bartender, "Oh, I have to take these pain pills and muscle relaxers and everything. So I'm just gonna have one drink. I'm just gonna have one drink." Now, this is typical alcoholic behavior. And you know, that's all I'm gonna have, but make it a good one. So he would make me a Manhattan in a big glass.
See, yeah.
And it's my bar. I'm the queen. That's they used to call me. And I'm talking to people, and that glass is empty. What am I going to do? I'm going to push that glass forward and expect it to get filled. And my bartender, who died from this disease, from alcoholism, he would whisper to me, "You told me just to give me one." I know, but I'm the boss. Give me one. If you don't, I'll come back and get my own. Right? And what happened was I could have died, actually. I could have died. But I started having blackouts, and I never had a blackout in my life. And I'm a very controlling person. And I did not like the next day being told things that I did or said that I did not remember. That was my battle. I mean, seriously. And real quick, I knew something was wrong. I was very depressed, and I knew a friend of mine that when he got really bad, he was a doctor, by the way. And when he got really into drugs and stuff, he went to this place, which I thought was a spa. Okay. And he came back and he was good again. I said, I want to go to that spa that Dr. Bob goes to, not knowing it was a rehab. So I laughed every day till now how just some higher power than me led me there, you know?
Well, the other thing is though that once you got there, you did the work, right? And so, I mean,
Yes, I got
we
me
a lot of
clean.
people, yeah, a lot of us walk in many doors and we don't follow through. And so, I mean, the reality is that even with rehab, I mean, I did rehab too, but the truth is that recovery requires a commitment longer than inpatient treatment. And so,
Absolutely.
you have to do the work in the facility, but you really need to keep doing work when you get out. And
Yeah,
especially for like the first 1 to 2 years is really sort of the critical time, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't believe that we need to be most of us don't need to be hyper focused on our recovery for the rest of our life, but most of us do need to be hyper focused for that first year, 1 to 2 years, to build that
Yes,
foundation, to have for
absolutely.
our brain to have time to heal, for us
Yes.
to develop new positive habits, which I think is a big part of recovery, is just learning how to live and make more positive choices, and
Yeah,
do things
yeah.
that are actually in your own best interest, and in the end do the things you actually want to
You
do,
do. Yeah, that's a good
because
point.
when you're in the middle of your addiction, you're doing things that you don't actually there, it's not really your preferred life, right? I mean, it can be a
Right.
miserable existence. And
Well,
so,
that's what my 20 years of drinking was. When I left the rehab, the psychiatrist told me you're cross-addicted and dual diagnosed. You do have chronic anxiety and depression, and it's genetic. And we know that from your history and from blood tests and different things and your what you told us. And it doesn't matter that you stopped alcohol and drugs. You can pick up food, you can pick up another item. And I took them seriously. And I was sober not even a year. And I gained 50 pounds. Because why? I turned to food. And you know what I did? I went to a rehab in California for eating disorders. I was committed. I was committed. And then 5 years later, I had depression and I went inpatient to the Caring Foundation to work on family of origin issues that I needed to get out. Plus, I'm telling this for my listeners, 9 years of either being in counseling or a rehab or having a therapist, group counseling, whatever I needed to do. 9 years straight.
that's interesting because it was 9 years of therapy for me too. So I always knew that the trauma, the violence was underneath my drug use. And so when I got home from rehab and I did a longer term program, I was in there for 5 months. But when I got home, I did understand that I needed to be in therapy, and I understood I needed someone with expertise in that kind of violence history. And so I really looked for somebody with trauma expertise. And I did individual therapy for 3 years with her. I was on meds for 3 years, and then I was able to take, because for me it was PTSD, which I didn't even know I had. Like, I didn't
Yes,
know you could have PTSD if you weren't a war vet, but it would, like, you, it was, but it showed up mostly as very
yes,
severe anxiety.
that
But
is true.
after the 3 years of individual therapy, I went into group therapy with women with trauma histories. And that was a whole new level of healing for me.
Yes,
And I always caution, I don't want to scare anybody who is dual diagnosis. Look, a very high percentage of people when they get sober have another mental health condition to also
yes,
work on. That's very common. But it
yes.
took 9 years for me to get to what I considered like mostly recovered. But it's not
Mhm.
like a light switch, right? It's not
No,
terrible, and then 9 years it's better. It's better,
no.
better, better, better. It's gradually
Yeah.
improving,
And it's a
gradually.
mindset. It's a
Yeah,
mindset. You have to make a commitment to yourself and that you'll do whatever, that you don't want to go back to that darkness. And
right.
I find that, and especially in my case, if you are someone and you don't even realize that you have chronic depression or PTSD or panic attacks, you don't even know what's happening with, what do? You self-medicate
Yeah.
with alcohol. That's what I was doing. I was self-medicating. And then the medication became the addiction.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the two common impetuses towards developing an addiction are trauma and or untreated mental health. I mean, those are the two
I
primary.
had both.
Yeah.
And genetic too, I had genetic also.
Yeah. Yeah. But but the good news is it was also, I didn't do the trauma therapy just to stay sober. I knew that if I was going to be happy and
Yes.
productive, I had to get this under control. Now, I probably couldn't have stayed sober in the long run if I didn't anyway, because the symptoms were so extreme. I would have wanted to relieve
Yeah.
the symptoms. But it was also just to like actually figure out a way to be happy, which I had never really experienced. And so the effort was worth it. And it allowed me to really calm down. I mean, part of what was a problem in my early recovery is that even when I was making the right choices and doing positive things, I couldn't feel them emotionally because I was so wound up with anxiety that I couldn't like feel proud of myself or really, feel happy about where my life was going because all I could see was my fear about what was going to happen tomorrow
Oh
or
yeah.
90% of the things I could have done right, but I would only notice the 10% I did wrong, and that's where I was going to be focused. And so it really took me a while to be able to get that kind of reaction, that mental focus on negative, that negative thinking, that negative expectation. I had to get that under control if I was ever going to enjoy my
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
including my own good choices, my own, good
Yeah.
new decisions and everything that I was doing in a positive
Yeah.
direction.
And Mary Beth, and you mentioned this, that helping others in their journey also helps us. And that's a teaching from AA too. And for me, I took that seriously. I sponsored, I don't know how many women, hundreds, because 33 years, of course, I sponsored a lot of women. And some of them made it, and some didn't, because it's not about me, it's about them and their commitment. But we had this wonderful judge in Lackawanna County, and he came up with what we call drug court.
Mhm.
So the drug cases went right to him. They didn't go to, whatever it was. And I had the honor of being the liaison for the women's drug court, which was wonderful because they had money to give me to take these women on retreats. And we would do a weekend retreat. So I got into a position where I was helping other people at a pretty high level because the rehab I went to also had me come in once a week and run a group. Now, why am I telling you that? Because that gave me purpose. That gave me purpose. And
Yes.
you talk about that in your book.
Yes, I mean, I do think that, I think like, first of all, I'm not a 12-step person, but I know that most of the people that stay around in all peer support groups, like including Lifering, Secular Recovery, and She Recovers and others, a lot of the reason the old timers hang around isn't because they need the meeting. It's because they're giving back, right? They're giving
Exactly.
back to their group. They're helping the newcomer, the
Absolutely.
newcomer. I mean, one of the things I do agree with 12 steps is the focus needs to be on the newcomer. Once you get
Absolutely.
stable in your own
Mhm.
sobriety, that's the goal should be about that. And so and for me now, because look, I'm able to be of service in a brand new way because I'm retired judge, right? So I don't have to worry about professional ramifications. I can say I shot meth for many years, right? And I can talk about all the abuse and even my own poor choices, things, that my behaviors that
Yes.
weren't great,
Yes.
in a new open way because I'm retired. And so
I
I
get that.
retired in 2020 and I've really tried to use this time to make a new role for myself. Like I do a lot of writing. I have my book out, my memoir, from Junkie to Judge, but also like I've had pieces in the Wall Street Journal and Recovery Today and the LA Times, and I do a lot of speaking, including I train lawyers and judges. And it's just allowed me to be of service in a new way, and it's very rewarding. So
Yeah.
I like writing, I like speaking, and I like talking to the newcomers. I like talking to friends and family. I like educating and sharing information,
Yes.
but it's also rewarding because I'm able to give back in a new way.
Absolutely. And the key thing I got out of that too was you said, I'm retired now, so I can fully open the gate. And Marworth Rehab. Now, Marworth Treatment Center it was an excellent treatment center. They got movie stars went there. I mean, it was really high end. And I met some famous people there, but there were these sort of well-kept secret meetings that were just for attorneys or judges or doctors or lawyers because they were worried about their
Yes.
business reputation. I understand that, I understand that. So it made it a little harder for them, but it was possible. And I remember, I won't say her name, very famous actress, and she was in my women's group. And she said, "Can I talk to you after the meeting?" And I said, "Yes." And then she said, "I'm not going to be able to go to AA meetings because of who I am. And I said, "That's ridiculous." I said, "There are many Hollywood stars that are in AA or some kind of group, and they don't have to tell people. You ask somebody, and they'll tell you where you can go where it's just your professional peers, right?" Well, she didn't take my advice, and she really helps, but I tried.
Yeah, I mean, you're like I belong to She Recovers, which is recovery not just from substance use, but also trauma and mental health and behavioral disorders like eating, everything together. And we have a legal professional subgroup, and a lot of bar associations have legal group recovery supports for
That's
both
right.
mental health and substances. And a lot of times they are more comfortable talking to each other. And
Yeah.
doctors, you're right, the same. But the truth is anybody can have worries about their boss finding out, right?
Yeah,
And
but not
so
me.
one
Absolutely.
of the advantages of online meetings, especially if you live in a small community, is that it's more anonymous.
My
Because if you go
husband does that.
online, your
Yeah.
odds of running into somebody you
Mm.
know are very low. Plus, you could change your picture or shut
Yes.
off the video. You
Yes.
could change your name. I mean, it's much more
No
anonymous on.
excuses. There's no excuses.
That's
COVID
right.
2020, everybody discovered like Zoom. And my husband still goes to online meetings because he can't drive anymore.
Right,
So,
that's another reason. Exactly. Disabilities, women with small children.
yes,
I mean, people in rural communities, there are all kinds of reasons. I mean, some people prefer in person and some people prefer online, but now we have a much more wider variety. And it's also better for the for the non-12 step groups, like Life Range Secular Recovery. I'm on the board. We're peer support. We've been around
okay.
since 95 and our parent organization's been around since the 80s. But we were never in every town the way 12 steps is. And so
Right.
we had online meetings before COVID, but now we have 95 online meetings. And so whatever group sort of appeals to you
Yes.
philosophically or meeting format, our meeting format is very different than a 12-step meeting format. But now everybody in the country has access to the non-12 step groups if that's what they want to attend, because
Yeah.
you attend it online even if it's not in your local town. And
You
so for
said
me,
your parent company. What's the parent company?
the
Like,
parent organization was SOS, Secular Organization for Sobriety, but they basically don't exist anymore. There's like
oh, okay.
three SOS meetings left, and LifeRing in total's got like just in the US alone, we've got around 150 when you combine in
So
person
who
and
are you
others.
involved with now? Like, where would someone go if they wanted to do that?
Yeah, so you go to the website lifering.org and they have a list of the online meetings and the in-person meetings. And so, and I'm also on the board for She Recovers, and that's sherecovers.org, and we have face-to-face and in-person. But like you say, when we're talking about the newcomer, I don't actually care if people pick my groups. I just want them
Yeah.
to know that there are options out there so they
Yeah.
can. Today, you can just Google, 12-step alternatives, and you can look at these groups.
Of
What is
course.
philosophy? What is their meeting format? Plus, you can combine. There are a lot of people in LifeRing that do AA and LifeRing. Like you don't
Of
even have to
course.
pick one or the other.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
my goal isn't to sort of push people in one direction or another. My goal is to just say there are numerous options. If you
Yeah.
look into them, and one or two of those groups are going to sound like my people are there, or I'd be comfortable there. Go to that one. Go to
Yeah,
that
they're
one.
comfortable. Now,
Yes.
15 years ago, I was sent from the heavens, who knows, a woman who was an atheist. Her drug of choice was Coke. So I really did not have those two things in common with her. And she said, "I don't know how I'm going to do this higher power stuff because I'm an atheist." So I approached her recovery through nature, and that she did believe that there was something bigger than her, even if it was nature and just the universe. And and it got through. And she is sober, 15 years, doesn't drink or do coke. So we're all on common ground, but we just have to find how to get there, like you're saying.
Yeah, although I'll say this, I could never do 12 steps because it's not just finding the higher power, it's the turning over your will in your life. That is not a concept that I can accept, but that's
I
not right
understand.
for me, right? But
That's
I'll
it.
also say it's not like all the faith-based people go to 12 steps and all the non-faith-based people go elsewhere. You're right. There are atheists and agnostics that make 12 steps work, and there are a lot of faith-based or spiritual people in the other groups because they prefer the other groups for reasons other than higher power. They prefer
Exactly.
the meeting format, or they like the self-empowerment approach, or the individualized recovery plan approach. So it's not, there's no hard line with that.
There's
It's really about just
no,
looking at the whole picture and seeing which group fits better, and just try them out and see which one you like best.
you know, I kind of fell away after 2020 and a lot of my own health problems from being involved with AA. My husband's still very involved with AA. But I remind people that are staunch AA people that in the big book, there is a place that says it does not matter what spiritual path you take as long as you take a spiritual path. And it doesn't have to be Alcoholics Anonymous. And I will show it to them in the book because they don't believe me. And so I go to a non-religious church now. It's a spiritual church. We do meditation during our service. And that to me is very important. That touches me. So I'm living a spiritual life and I'm doing what I want because I'm writing and I'm doing these shows and it makes me very happy. And that's what counts. I
Well,
think.
the other thing that reminds me of is that what we need, what we're attracted to, can change over time, right? And
Oh yeah.
so for example, with 12 steps, a lot of people in the beginning, they really like the structure of it, right? But sometimes 3 years later, you're looking for new ideas. And, well, how do other people do it? And a lot of people are attracted to the mindfulness movements and other ways
Yes.
of looking at it. And so it's not even that, this once you pick, you're going to be stuck there for life because a lot of times what we're looking for can change over time.
Yeah, life is a journey, and thing that is, sometimes our journey in the beginning, like ours, is rough. It's rough, and then you're looking for a different path, and most times you pick the wrong path because you have no coping skills. I had no coping skills. I didn't understand even what love looked like, so I had to make many wrong turns on that journey until I finally got to a place where I felt I was on the straight and narrow. If that analogy works for you.
Well, I'll say this, the way I look at it is I made a lot of right choices in the beginning, but I certainly also made a lot of wrong choices. And that's just a natural part of recovery. Because like you say, recovery and even making positive choices or setting goals and building a plan, those are skills.
There's
And it takes
things,
a while to develop those skills. And one reason sobriety is harder in the beginning is because you don't have practice.
because
Practice.
a lot of us did grow up in abusive families and alcoholic families and parents that were more focused on their own needs than their children. But I wanted to ask you, so what was like some of the biggest challenges that you faced during your recovery, and how did you handle that?
I mean, definitely the trauma recovery was harder than my substance recovery, and as we
Yes.
talked about, it took a lot longer.
Yeah.
But I will say part of the challenge for me was that the anxiety created a lot of spinning. Like I would get really hyper focused on anything going wrong, and I could spin and spin. As an example, if after my work day, it was not uncommon for me to review the day and find like, oh my God, but I did this wrong, or maybe my tone wasn't right. And I would be spinning through the day. And then I would get home. This is before cell phones. So I would get home and I would call and leave myself voicemails with explanations as to why I had done what I thought were horrible mistakes. I would go to work the next day, and I swear to God, sometimes there were 8 voicemails all from me. Okay,
And would
because
you correct,
and
would you correct everything then?
and no, but it was crazy talk. I mean, it was
Yeah,
like so disproportionate, so out of control. Nobody ever talked to me about any of these things because they weren't, it was just,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was my sense of proportion, my
yeah,
sense of sort of any confidence that the world was ever going to work out for me or that I could handle when things went wrong was
yeah,
very low, and I had
yeah,
to gradually build up. And so I was always focused on the negative, and I was always living in a constant state of fear. And that was sort of PTSD and trauma based. And it took a long time to get that resolved. I mean, it really a long time. It still happens, but it's very little. I say I'm 92 to 95% recovered now, depending on the day,
No,
So
I totally can relate to this. And I tend to be a perfectionist. I'm very organized. And I do research on things, and I have a college education that I had to fight for myself. But I get asked because of that to do a lot of things. And I don't say no. And all of a
yeah.
sudden, I was getting overwhelmed. And I could feel the anxiety and the depression coming. And I said, it's happening here. So I stepped down from both of the boards I was on. And one was my church, and I hated to do it, but I needed to take care of myself. Okay. So I understand that, and getting triggered. Like I could still be triggered by things so stupid because of a sense of perfectionism, I'll say. My father used to stand behind me when I was like scrubbing a pot clean or something, and he would criticize the housework that I didn't do it well enough, things like that. And to this day, like if I'm cooking and my husband comes in the kitchen, get out, get out. I can't stand it when it
Uh, uh,
brings
uh.
back that, my dad, but I I have tools now. I know I can take a breath and I could just center myself or maybe do some meditation and think about, okay, why did you feel that way? Well, you know why you felt that way. He reminds you of your father doing that. And I tell him, it's not you, you know, it's my PTSD.
Right, right, right.
Exactly.
Well,
So,
that also reminds me that like when I got sober, I saw a lot of things I needed to work on, but one thing that what turned out to be a big deal that I didn't see at all in the beginning was my interpersonal skills. Like my mother was very verbally aggressive, and if she was like irritated or whatever, she would jump down people's throats. And
oh,
I was doing that, and it took me a long time to even
yeah,
see that I was doing it. It took me a long
yes.
time to even understand it. And then once I saw it and I was like, oh my God, like I don't want to treat people like this. But
No,
it took me practice to be able to gradually improve. Like at first I could do better if the situation was like not like low tension, but not if it got escalated. And gradually I could do better, even with increased at emotional level. But the other thing was at first what I got better at was not using the words, the harsh words, but had a problem with tone and body language for a long time.
I tell my husband, I didn't say anything. He'll go, oh, you're right. Your body language says no. You
Yes,
don't have to say
yes,
a word.
yes, yes. It took me a long time to get the tone and body language under
Yes.
control.
Now, let me ask you that. Maybe in all our talking, this was mentioned, but did we talk about your bottom? What was your bottom when you were in
Yeah.
addiction?
I mean, bottom is always retrospective. I'm just going to caveat. We don't want you to have a horrible bottom.
No.
Let's intervene with this problem at the
Yes.
mild or moderate level and not wait till it gets extremely severe like I
Yes.
did. But for me, it was really a combination. So I started using at 12. I was definitely in addiction by 15 or 16, and I didn't get sober till 32. So like you, it was 20 years for me.
Yeah.
And at 32, it was really a combination. So first of all, I couldn't hold a job, right? I mean, my terminology is I didn't work my way up the corporate ladder. I worked my way down the corporate ladder.
Yeah. I
But
know.
also, I was having physical problems from all the meth, and I was just, emotionally devastated. I was feeling hopeless and trapped. And then my partner, he was really done. Like he was going to throw me out. And so it was really all of those things in combination, which I think a lot of times for many of us, it's the combination of negative factors. The consequences were huge, and I was miserable. And so finally at 32, I said, well, maybe I ought to go to rehab.
Yeah, the thing of it, I have been part of interventions through the years, and even with my own sister, who we just couldn't help. And I did I didn't have an intervention per se. I had a feeling, that I'd wake up in the morning and I wouldn't want to die, but I wouldn't want to live. It was like an awful, and that's depression. And the blackouts, the loss of control. Those are the things. And not knowing where I was going, I knew I had to go somewhere. So I did make that first step. I was just lucky enough that it was the right place at the right time. At the right time. Some people just aren't ready. Some people are never ready.
That's true, but I will say where I went was the wrong place. I mean, it was
Well,
they were really vehemently and adamantly exclusively 12 step. Like they told me repeatedly there's nothing else. And I told them
oh,
like five, six reasons why it wasn't the right fit for me. And they literally said over and over, you're gonna fail, Mary Beth, you're gonna fail. If you don't do what we tell you to do, exactly all of it, you're gonna fail. And I said, but I can't do that. That's not a good approach for me. And so I was in the wrong place.
oh.
But because I was
For
there,
5 months? You were there
I
for 5 months?
yes,
Oh
but
my
also
gosh.
part of it was that I believed them at first that it was the only option because they're the experts,
Well,
right?
they're
So if they tell
brainwashing
me
you.
there's nothing
Yeah.
else, I thought, well, there's nothing else.
Yeah.
But I did try to just like use the parts I could and ignore everything else. But then I got home and I always emphasize for the younger people, it's January of 94 and there's no Google. Okay. So I got in the car and I drove to the library and it turned out even in 94, it wasn't true. There were options and they didn't tell me about them. And so I did find alternatives at the time, Women for Sobriety, which still exists today, Life Rings Parent, and
Yes.
Smart Recovery's Parent, which was Rational
Yeah.
Recovery. And
Yeah.
so finding the alternatives was a great weight off my shoulders
Exactly.
because they kept telling me in rehab that I was like self-will run amok and your
Of
best thinking guy
course.
here and all that BS. And so finding out that other people had
Yeah.
successfully done it other ways, that was a great weight off my shoulders. And so that
Yeah.
was just a reassurance that I wasn't just being arrogant, that there actually were other approaches
Yeah.
that were clearly a better fit for me. And part of the reason I say that is sometimes you're mandated to go to things that aren't the best fit for you. And if that's true, know that once you're done with that mandated program or while you're in it, you can also do some of the other options that might be a better fit. Sometimes we're forced into a situation where it's not the best fit, but sometimes you just have to make the best of it, get what you can out of it, and then use the other approaches on the side or when you get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what advice, well, you just gave some good advice, but what other advice would you give to others who are struggling uh, with addiction, and especially people that want to have a professional, successful career, but they have addiction? So what advice of all of this that we've said do you think is the most important?
Well, I will say that when I got sober, I was 32 years old, which felt ancient at the time, right? I'm ancient, and I
That's
and I
40.
I had wasted my life profession. I had a Berkeley degree, good grades, and a horrible resume. And so for me, I had to be realistic and start where I was because there was nobody was going to hire me for a career job. Like my resume was horrible, but I wasn't ready for it either. And so I started where I was. I started with a part-time, low-level, temporary admin job, just to sort of get in the habit of like going to work every day on
Yeah.
time
Yes.
and doing what I was supposed to do. And then my second job was a mid-level permanent full-time admin job. And then my third job was a supervisory job at a larger company. And then at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law. and I was a lawyer. And at 20 years sober, 20, I became a federal judge. And so part of what I say on the professional side is, it's often about incremental improvement. It's about an honest assessment about where you are and what is the right first step that you're ready to handle and that you can actually get. And then once you get that first job, now think is the second job that I want? How do I get the skills that I need to get that second job? And just move forward step by step. Don't worry about where you're going to be in 5 years because especially when you're early in recovery, you don't even know what you're going to want in 5 years when you're brand new in recovery,
No,
right? You just don't.
absolutely.
And
No.
so, for me, I always talk about let's start where we are. Let's get the first goal, the first plan, implement it, and then think about goal number two. And
Yeah.
if you do that, it's amazing how far you can get in 2 or 5 or 20 years, you know?
You never know in the future what's going to happen. And I was 72 years old when I wrote my book.
See? Yes, yes, see?
Now, if you told me when I was younger, you're going to write a book, but not till you're 72 years old, I would have said, what are you, crazy? I'll be sitting in a rocking chair and look at a TV. No, I wrote that book. And what happened for me, I'm going to send you a copy, a digital copy, for just because. And what
Thank
happened for
you.
me is I had not just women, I had men that read the book that came to me and told me how they felt. And I had a 16-year-old boy who not only read the book, but follows me on Instagram. And I thought to myself, wow, I need to
Yeah.
reach out because it's not just like women that have problems with this stuff. The trauma we had when we were younger, sexual trauma, and all that stuff. So that's why my podcast and my YouTube episodes don't just focus on women. I try to do neurodiversity and, gender identification, all types of different ways to approach things. And we don't just talk about addiction either. I think your mind has to have other things going on, which you do and you believe in. I could tell by your book,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so, I mean, my book, part of what I really wanted to do was show what building a more individualized recovery plan looks like because more people are interested in doing that today, but
Yes.
also that interplay between mental health recovery and substance recovery. So 30% of my book is recovery. It's my first 3 years because I wanted it to be useful, And so, like you, I wanted it to be something that was going to be helpful to others like I want it to be, like an example. I mean, I
Yes.
have 30 years of sobriety. We're very similar on that. But also I wanted to use it as sort of a stigma reducer, like owning up that I shot meth and yet I became a judge, a sign of hope, but also an actual practical example of what building a more individual plan looks like. But also the techniques I use, 12-step people can use those techniques too. There's nothing
Sure.
unique about it that wouldn't apply. And so
Absolutely.
you're right. It's a new opportunity to be of service and a new opportunity to be of service in multiple ways. My first big publication was I had an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal when I was 59. And so,
Yeah.
that was the time to do it. We all have phases in life. And for us,
Mhm.
our writer phase and our speaker phase was later. But it's also, I mean, what are we going to do? Sit around and watch television? I mean, it's really an opportunity to
No.
still engage and to still feel useful, which is always something that I think we both really value.
Yeah, it's theology, there's my pattern. I get stuck. Theology and any spiritual teacher will tell you that, keep an open mind. An open mind is what you need because then you will grow. You'll grow. You'll never stop growing, and if I come across something that I don't know, I'm right on the Google. I'm researching it. Well, we could talk another hour because we really have a lot. But I'm going to have to end the show. And I would love to have you back at another time. And we could like pinpoint maybe one specific part of your situation and your recovery and things like that. So that sound good?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, good. All right, everybody. I hope well, thank you so much for coming. Um, This was a great conversation for me. Really opened my mind up even more about recovery and being sober and helping people. And I hope my listeners also got something out of it. I'm sure they did. So everyone just embrace your day and feel joy. Thank you. And thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you for having me. And let me just mention it quick that if anyone ever wants to reach out to me, I actually have my website, junkietojudge.com, has a messaging feature, and I answer all messages. And if they're on Twitter, I'm at Mary Beth O _. And of course, my book is on Amazon and all the usual sites, From Junkie to
Yeah,
Judge: One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. So
I
just to
love
throw all that out there real quick. But
it.
I too have really enjoyed the conversation and providing, such important information and ideas to your audience. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it was a joy. All right, everyone. Have a great day.